Hi everyone, I'm Rod McDonald and welcome back to Red Leaf Scale Modeling. Today we're going to take a look at this guy, ANA Models Kit number 7217, the 1/72nd scale S-125M, which is the SA-3 GOA anti-aircraft missile system on the T-55 chassis. So it's 2002. I've got Tamiya's M1 Abrams with the Mine Plow and the Challenger, both in 1/35th scale, and I'm online looking for some reference images that I can use for both of these builds. Now there's no shortage of great images that came from Desert Storm of both of these vehicles that show everything, the dirt, the grime, the wear and tear, lots of worn paint, even battle damage. But this image really caught me, especially the SA-3 GOA missile. Then when I saw this image, I was hooked, and I knew that at some point in my modeling career, I had to build this vehicle in 1/35th scale. And this would involve the modification of a T-54 or T-55 hull, and then scratch building everything above that. The turret, the quad launch rail system, and all four missiles. So naturally, it was time to start looking for parts and information. Tamiya released an excellent T-55A in 1/35th scale in 2002. Gran released a 1/72nd scale C-125 in 2003. Not the right size, but it's a good start. In 2008, Trumpeter released a respectable T-54B. Again, not the size I really wanted, but now we've got the hull and we've got the missile system. So it's time to put the two together. In 2009, PST Models released a 1/72nd scale limited edition kit of this radical new system. In 2016, TACOM released a jaw-dropping T-54B in 1/35th scale. In 2019, ANA Models released the PST kit in a new box. And in 2020, Trumpeter released a stunning 1/35th scale SA-3 GOA missile system on the 5P71 launcher. After 23 short years, a 1/35th scale kit of an SA-3 GOA missile system on a T-55 chassis seems like a very real possibility. My excitement finally got the best of me, and I convinced myself if I built the smaller kit as a practice run, I could get that energy out into the universe, and the 1/35th scale kit would come along within the next few years. So I dove right in. Now, part of my research prior to any build is to watch or read build reviews by other modelers. It's a great way to find out what you're going to get yourself into, the quality of the kit, the workflow, and any pitfalls you might encounter. And this build was no exception. The best article I found was by Al Magnus at onthewaymodels.com regarding Gran Models Kit 7209, the S-125 missile system without the T-55 chassis. In it, he expertly addresses all of the properties of this kit, both good and bad, especially the fact that a modicum of modeling skill is required in order to produce a result that would meet today's standards. Now, this was supposed to be a nice little practice run, but once I realized how much effort was involved to get all of these parts ready, I decided to turn on the camera and share the experience. The kit consists of a total of 9 sprues molded in a gray opaque plastic, 1 small decal sheet, and an 8-page instruction manual. Page 1 provides some instructional symbols, the sprue maps, and the layout for the decal sheet. And the parts are numbered here on the sprue maps, but not on the sprues themselves. The paint list is at the top of page 2, and then construction begins with the turret and the launch rail system. On page 3, we complete the launch rail system, complete the missiles, add the missiles to the launch rails, and add that whole subassembly to the turret. Page 4 takes us through the lower tank hull, the suspension, and the tracks. And on page 5, we complete the upper tank hull and add the launcher array. And finally, pages 6, 7, and 8 are the color plates with the decal placement indicated at the bottom right corner of page 8. Now, we picked the project up after about 6 weeks of work, and my frustration level is off the charts because the amount of work required on every single part to get them to fit properly and then eventually to get them to look good is just ridiculous. In fact, the decision to do a review on this kit occurred when I considered throwing it in the bin. At that point, I figured it was probably a better idea to finish this model and give any prospective builders a heads up on what they're about to deal with. I broke the model into 9 basic subassemblies. Starting at the top and working left to right, we've got the tank hull, the left track and the right track assemblies, the missile launch rail assembly, the turret to the right of that, and then at the bottom we have each of the 4 missiles. And this is very much my style because it allows you to do all your heavy lifting first. And once the main components are established, then we can start adding the details. We'll start by looking at the turret, and this first photograph was the principal source of reference for so many of the small details. especially the drive shaft and the gearboxes on the elevation cylinder. And this second photo gives us a look at the right-hand side. The hex bolt heads securing the edges of the panels were created by slicing small chunks off of a piece of stretched hex styrene rod. The layout was approximated from the photos we just saw, and then each location was prepared with a small dab of ultra-thin cement, and then each bolt head was set in place with the tip of a number 11 blade. Grab handles were made using 28 gauge copper wire, and a styrene shim was used to make sure that each grab handle was the correct distance from the surface and parallel to the surface. Set the shim, test fit the grab handle, dip the ends in a little bit of super glue, and position the grab handle. Just that easy. The bolt flanges for the main gear drive seen here and for the trunnion bearings on the main cylinder were sliced from a piece of styrene tube. And after about a dozen attempts, I had the 3 pieces that I needed. And they went into position relatively easily. Apologies for the white on white, by the way. The tiny little bolt heads, however, were much more difficult. A couple of small pieces of nested styrene tubing were used to keep the turret removable for painting. The smaller diameter piece was attached over the post on the base plate. Then the opening in the turret floor was drilled to the appropriate size, and the larger piece installed within the turret. And voila, one fully rotating removable turret. This also made it much easier to prop up the parts and attach the launch rail assembly to the turret without having to work around the tank chassis. Mr. Surfacer 500 is my go-to filler for tiny gaps. I apply it with a small pointed brush and use their lacquer thinner to thin it, both for the application process and to clean up both the work area and the tools. I start with the thicker gaps first when the material is at its thickest, fresh from the bottle. To make it thicker, let it sit for a few minutes so the lacquer can evaporate out of it. Otherwise, add lacquer to thin it to whatever consistency works best for the application. A thicker consistency was used to fill the gap around the driver's hatch, but the margins got a little bit wide. I let this set up for about 15 minutes, then started to clean up with lacquer thinner. Once the lacquer revitalizes the material, you simply brush it away, and in a few minutes, you end up with a beautiful clean joint. And naturally, this was applied to all of the fittings over the entire model. Oh, those missiles. Okay, that was terrible, but in my opinion, the missiles did need a lot of work because they're a focal point of the model. So all of the soft molded on detail was removed and the basic shape of the missile was established. Before removing the molded on conduits, the sharpest edge was scribed into the plastic with a sharp blade, which makes it easy to replicate its length and its position on the model. The copper wire was fastened using single-use super glue. Any excess was cleaned up with a debonder, and then the D shape was fleshed out using Mr. Surfacer 500. Once these were to shape, the fins were installed and everything was aligned. The rectangular cover at the nose was installed and shaped in situ, and then the final filling and sanding was completed. Parts A6, the nose canards, were far too thick and all were replaced with plastic card. And a little further back, parts G1 and G3 suffered from shape and labeling issues. Parts G3 were filed to get a better shape and to try and achieve a more scale thickness. Parts G3 were scratch built from plastic card. And after one last reference check, all were cemented into position. The fin controls is one of those details that can't be ignored because they add so much to the finished model. So after taking some measurements, I created a jig for both ease of assembly and consistency. And because the control rods are on opposite sides of the missile, we actually have to make 4 for the left side and 4 for the right side. The different segments were made from 28 gauge copper wire, and to create the hint of a hinge on each end, small paddles were created by carefully squeezing the last ½ millimeter down to approximately half the diameter of the wire. Not only would it appear more like a hinge, it would also allow for a stronger bond with the superglue. As luck would have it, the teeth of these pliers would allow me to gauge the length of the shorter control rods. Each piece was clamped in the jaws to a 1½ millimeter overall length. The control arms for the front end were given a 90-degree bend, while the straight segments fitted to the control surfaces were simply cut off at this length. and then each piece was checked for consistency. First, the connecting rod is secured to the template. Then, the paddles of the control rods are dipped in superglue and carefully placed in position on the connecting rod, being sure to make 4 with the cranked portion on the left-hand side and 4 with the cranked portion on the right-hand side. To install them, we dip the ends of the connecting rods in superglue, then very carefully slip the angled portion at the front into the side of the missile. Then drop the straight portion at the rear straight down into the hole drilled in the control surface. Align everything properly before the cement sets, and mission accomplished. And finally, with the addition of the canards, all the subassemblies are complete. This kit is for the experienced modeler. It's a short-run kit, which means it doesn't have the same level of quality or ease of assembly that we've been treated to by the major manufacturers in recent years. Modeling skills are essential with this one. The first issue is with the transporter, which is not simply a turretless tank. The S-125M Neva Pechora self-propelled anti-aircraft missile system is a Polish design which mounts the Russian S-125 Neva anti-aircraft missile system on a modified Polish WZT-1 armored recovery vehicle. And while it was based on the lower hull and running gear of the T-54 tank, it was an entirely different vehicle. What this means for the modeler is that when it comes to the upper hull and superstructure, many of the details that are there shouldn't be there, like the fuel tanks on the right side fender, and details that should be there aren't there, like the specialized fittings on the front and rear of the hull. I omitted the fuel tanks, cleaned up the fenders, and added the supports, but lacked reference material that would allow me to build those specialized hull fittings. But I did manage to find some while editing this video, so I'll include those details at the start of the painting video. The next issue is that the parts are not well molded, and this is what started to get me frustrated because every part needs a serious amount of work to be ready for proper fit, not to mention a good finish. Thin parts are too thick, and delicate parts like grab handles are overscale. No surprise there. Draft, the angle designed into the side of a part to assist with release from the mold, was excessive. The gates are huge. Mold seams are very large, more like flash in many cases. Mold seams on the cylindrical parts are stepped, so they actually need to be filled prior to cleanup in order to achieve a proper round cross-section. There are some short shots, or parts that are not fully formed, and this includes the tip of each missile. Some parts had sink marks on both sides, and there are fine raised striations on the surface of the fins that obviously need to be sanded off. Now, none of this should be taken as a negative criticism of the kit. It's a model kit, and as with every model kit, modeling skills are required, some more than others. These are just my observations and my experience with this kit, but that's why right off the top I mentioned that modeling skills are required. The results look great, but you're going to have to work for it. In my opinion, the most critical part of this build is the launch rail subassembly, specifically the 4 launch rails, because everything needs to be lined up perfectly. All the tips and tails need to be aligned, all the launch rails need to be parallel with each other, the whole array needs to be squared up, and all the launch rails need to be on the same plane. Then, the launch rail subassembly needs to be properly aligned with the turret, and finally, the launch rails need to sit parallel to the ground when everything is in place on the transporter. But it's not as difficult as it sounds. Just be very methodical in the cleanup of the parts and in their alignment during final fit-up. I started by placing the 4 launch rails upside down on the cutting mat. Then, the support beam and the rear connecting arms were carefully positioned and everything was lined up using the grid on the cutting mat. Now at this point, I fit the main support beam to the launch rails, and I did this by adding shims or removing material at each of the contact surfaces on the beam itself to achieve a best fit of the beam to the rails. The connection points would be filled and sanded to shape afterwards, but the key to everything is to keep the launch rails perfectly aligned. Do not fit the launch rails to the beam. The beam in my kit was not straight, so fitting the launch rails to the beam would pull them all out of alignment. This may be a tedious process, but when the missiles are loaded and the tips form a nice straight line, it is all worth it. This was not an easy kit to build, but the subject is awesome and the finished model looks so cool. So that'll be it for now. I'll finish up the details on the hull, I'll do some final filling and sanding and get it painted for the next segment. I hope you found some part of this helpful. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment or a question because I want to know what you want to know. That's what fuels this channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and a special heartfelt thank you to all my subscribers. The support is very much appreciated. Happy modeling, everyone. I'll see you in the next one.